Hello and welcome to Thank You to Creations podcast. I am your host, Elle, and this week we're going to be wrapping up our series on serial killers. This is now our third episode, so if you haven't listened to the first two, please go and take a listen. Those were a little bit hard to put together, to be honest, because a lot of the information was hard to locate online. So, 18th century and 19th century serial killers, there was very little information that I could really find online. It was like digging through a whole bunch of dead leaves, I feel like, just because it was hard to pinpoint a lot of actual events. They did tie in with the names, and they tied in with like the year that it all happened, but who's to say, it's very old information. But before we get into it, I did want to always invite, right, not only special guests, which I hope to be having here in the upcoming months as well, trying to get back into that, but also invite just our listeners to my listeners, invite my listeners to give me some ideas because I am drawing blanks here. Like, I don't want to be repetitive with the content, and I also of course, feel like there's quite an abundance of different things going on in the world that it's so easy to get distracted by all that when everything that you're looking at, doom scrolling as they call it, it's bad news after bad news. So I always want to make sure that this platform serves as a time to get you away from that. See something cool, maybe creepy, scary, something that gets you distracted from all that's going on. Not to say that you shouldn't be informed. I think that it's very important for all of us to be informed. But I have heard from my own family and friends that it has been quite difficult, myself included, to become just a little distracted from all the other things going on in the world. um I myself took a bit of a hiatus in a lot of things the last few weeks, just trying to get a few things together, both health wise and overall well being, I would say. And I do think that if you're able to do that, you should. Or even if all you have are weekends to go and explore something new, do something that you've never done before, go and do that. This last week, actually, a little life update. I went to a local museum just about like 30 minutes away from where I live. And it was the most amazing, quiet time that I had spent in a while. Probably because nobody else was at the museum. Actually, when I paid for my ticket, which was about $5, actually, it was really inexpensive. The person who, charged me said to me, "Thank you for coming in, or else I wouldn't be doing anything the rest of the day." This was like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, I think, when I was there, maybe a little bit earlier. But he said no one had been there, all morning, and it was just amazing. I was just there drinking my hot chocolate, walking through all the different artifacts. It was really fun. So I definitely recommend taking a trip somewhere. If weekends are all you have, make an event out of it, make something fun out of it. All right, so enough about me, because we can go on for hours. We're going to jump right into our 20th century serial killers. Now, some of these names you might already heard, especially if you follow a lot of crime movies or shows, or other podcasts that are more based solely on the criminal justice side of the world. You might have already seen these. I know that some of these, there's even Netflix series that you can watch now. I never get into the Netflix series. I just, I was a criminal justice major in college. Well, I actually did get my associates in it, but because I had to go so deep into all the details of a lot of the names that we're going to mention today, and so many other news reports and all that for like 2 years of my life. And right out of high school. I wouldn't say I was traumatized, but it just didn't call my attention as I got older to see the series in a fiction kind of way, because a lot of these names you're gonna hear here just a second. um I feel that they've been almost glamorized when ultimately they were very terrible, scary people. So, and the first one we have on the list here is going to be Ted Bundy's. So he operated within the 1970s, and some will coin him the charismatic killer. His real name, Theodore Robert Bundy, and he had about 30 confirmed victims. Some say that number may be higher. He operated from 1974 to 1978, using his charms and good looks to lure victims, often faking injuries to gain sympathy, and primarily targeting young women, strangling them, bludgeoning. He also engaged in necrophilia and revisited crime scenes. He was first arrested in 1975, but escaped twice, recaptured in 1978 after killing three more victims, and he was executed in the electric chair in 1989. This was one of the first serial killers whose trials were nationally televised. So pretty much the entire world, if not at least the US, saw this, happen right before their eyes. His killings inspired books and movies, including The Silence of the Lambs. And like I mentioned, he's one of those characters, or one of, Netflix basically created a series on him, which I didn't watch. And I saw a lot of people who were into it. And I believe Zac Efron played him. And I can't, like, it's not my cup of tea to see these stories kind of get remade into TV shows like that, or movies. I don't know. Silence of the Lambs I have watched, and I actually did not know that it was inspired by what he did. But then again, like I said, it's just a preference, I guess. I've learned about them. I've seen documentaries. I've heard other podcasts in specific to Ted Bundy, but I'm not one to watch like anything that's been recently made on them. I honestly feel like, except for the victims, they themselves should just be forgotten. I mean, studied, yes, studied, because it is very interesting on how they became such horrific people. And I do feel like, specifically for Ted Bundy, he started really early on, like showing these types of he would do certain things, right? Like, he's not the only one though. Like, there are other serial killers that would, as children, experiment on animals or kill them, or they would have these really weird conversations with their parents, who just, the parents just brushed it off like, oh, they're just kids, and little things like that they wouldn't put together. And so I feel like if there was a possibility for them to have gotten the help they needed before they moved on to bigger crimes and killings, we may never know. But that's the portion I feel like could be studied for, future reference. Our next serial killer on the list is going to be Jeffrey Dahmer, and he is known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. Real name Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, confirmed victim 17, and he was active between 1978 and 1991. He lured young men to his apartment under false pretenses, drugged, strangled, and dismembered victims, engaged in necrophilia and cannibalism. He kept body parts as souvenirs, including skulls and organs. He was arrested in 1991 when a victim escaped and alerted police, sentenced to life in prison, murdered by a fellow inmate in 1994. Now, his crimes raised discussions on law enforcement negligence, and I remember this distinctively because one of my professors in college actually was really like passionate about this specific incident where the police ignored a victim's escape attempt. Basically, he ran out of the apartment once he realized that he had been drugged. And, this is a young man. I can't remember if he was Hispanic, I think, or Filipino, but point being is that he runs out there. He's not fully dressed. He obviously looks like he's under the influence of something. He runs right into these police officers asking for help. And then Jeffrey Dahmer comes after him and is telling them, "Oh, this is like my partner, and we just had a little bit too much to drink." So the police, instead of investigating further, they just basically give him back to Jeffrey, who then kills him in his apartment and dismembers him. Nothing else came about that. It really sparked debates about mental illnesses versus pure evil. And again, like I said, it's that very, topic is just very touchy, because who's to say that, again, Jeffrey Dahmer didn't show, these types of whether it was a mental illness or just odd behavior early on, and it was just never called out, or he never received the help he needed. Obviously, at this point, he did what he did and he paid for it, but it's something to think about and really, I would say, research. And it's just an interesting, I feel like, topic, and something that we should learn about moving forward. Next on our list, we have the Zodiac Killer, and he is, let's see, this was like the biggest unsolved mystery, I feel like, because every single news article that you may see about the Zodiac Killer, documentary, and so forth, I don't even think that they fully had concrete evidence of who he was. So there's no name for the Zodiac Killer. The confirmed number of victims is 5, but he claimed 37 in active years 1968 to 1974, possibly later. He targeted young couples and lone individuals, used guns and knives in different attack styles, sent cryptic letters and ciphers to newspapers, taunting authorities. So that's really what makes this, this entity, because we don't really even know who it could be, she or he, right? Is that he sent letters taunting authorities, but never giving enough information so that they could trace him where he was, or him, her, whichever. So he was never caught. Theories suggest multiple suspects, but no conclusive evidence. One of the most infamous unsolved serial killer cases in history, and inspired films like The Zodiac from 2007. Again, it's something that I'm sure they may still be investigating to today. He was never identified, and I hope that they've kept the research as far as like the evidence, which that's another big issue, because a lot of these serial killers operated when there was no organization within police forces, for evidence. So a lot of it went missing. And it really opens a Pandora box, honestly, because we think about serial killers, but then we also think about missing people, and how over decades it's taking this long for police, forces to gain not only an organization, but also the amount of people they need to keep things like evidence in check, and make sure that families are being contacted every year, every few years, if there's a change or there's a new finding in a case, which doesn't normally happen. They will hear that, very often. Our next, and I believe this is going to be our final serial killer on this list here, is Pedro López, the monster of the Andes, operated from 1970s to the 1980s, and coined the most prolific serial killer. Real name Pedro Alonso Lopez. Confirmed victims 110, but claimed over 300. His active years were from 1969 to 1980, and he targeted young girls ages from 8 to 12 in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, lured victims from marketplaces, strangled and buried them in mass graves. He was arrested in Ecuador in 1980 after attempting to kidnap a girl, confessed to over 300 murders, but was only convicted of 110. Released from a psychiatric hospital in 1998 due to legal loopholes. Disappeared after his release. Whereabouts unknown. Now, obviously, raised concerns about legal failures in handling serial killers, and one of the deadliest serial killers in history, yet relatively unknown outside Latin America. I actually had not heard about him before, And when I read the amount of confirmed victims and how he claimed to have over $300, it sent chills down my spine. And the fact that they had him in custody and then let him go, and they have no idea where in the world he is. This was in 1998, so he may well be into his elderly years at this point. I'm not quite sure how old he was when he started, his killing spree, but I'm sure he's well into it. And, for the sake of safety of everyone, I hope that he has found his demise somewhere, but I'm sure just like him, there are many others. And it brings a lot of questions, because it doesn't only happen in the US. We went through Ted Bundy, we went through Jeffrey Dahmer, the Zodiac Killer, which all those were based out of the United States, but this last one is in Latin America. So I do believe that the United States holds, unfortunately, number one at this point for serial killers as far as how many there have been in the last few decades. But it doesn't mean that Latin America or places like Mexico or um, Europe, right, the UK, that they don't have serial killers as well. We may just not hear much about them. But this concludes our third and final episode on serial killers. This was a lot of fun. I think that it really took my podcast to a different direction. And now I am getting more, I would say, into my regular content, right? I do want to do a few new episodes on specific states in Mexico and just kind of talk about a little bit of the history, indigenous roots, and things of that nature. So those are going to be in the upcoming episodes in the near future. I also have a few pending interviews with some really great people that I hope to get those done as soon as we can get a good time and date for those. And like I mentioned earlier in our in my episode, in the beginning, that I'm always open for ideas. Or if you have a small business and you're wanting to talk about, your small business, if you have any topic, that you may want to chat with someone with, you're more than welcome to send me a message and we can schedule something. I'm always open to new ideas and filming content. So definitely make sure to follow the next episode, which should be in the next few weeks. I still haven't quite decided on the topic, but I'm sure if you follow my social media accounts, I will drop some hints or drop some promotional content so you can see what's coming up. Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this episode and I hope to see you next time.